There we go. Okay, so we are, of course, using Zoom, and most of us are Zoom professionals by now, but if this is your first time Zooming, just a couple of icons to be aware of. On the right hand, or excuse me, the left hand side, in the green circle, there's the mute and the start video. So like Tyler mentioned, we want to make sure that all of you have your video and your video off and your mute on so that our technology runs a little bit smoother. That green circle in the middle, if you want to type in the chat box, we might be asking you some questions, or if you have questions to ask us, you can type, push that little chat bubble and the chat box will pop up. Do make sure on the right here, that green circle, that it says that it's going to everyone because someone might have the same question as you. So our presenters today, my name is Sarah Doxson. I'm an environmental educator with Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. You heard Tyler's voice at the beginning. He's also an environmental educator. And then Miss Kelsey, she's going to be our chat box moderator. She's our program and volunteer coordinator. And people like to ask us, since we work for Bird Conservancy, what's our favorite bird? And our favorite birds change every day. So today, my favorite bird is a broad-tailed hummingbird. Kelsey's is a Townsend solitaire. And Tyler's is a Bullock's oriole, which he said he saw at the office the other day, which is very exciting. So a little bit more about Bird Conservancy. We are a conservation nonprofit based out at Bar Lake State Park in Brighton, Colorado. And we work to conserve birds and their habitats. So we do that in a pretty unique way. We have kind of 3 teams that work together to accomplish that. So we are part of the education team. Our job is to get people excited about birds, help them to learn why they're important and how they can help. We also have our science team, and they're the ones out there doing that boots on the ground research, monitoring bird populations and doing bird banding, things like that. And then our stewardship team they're actually working with private landowners and helping them to implement conservation practices on their land that not only benefit the birds and the environment, but also their farming and ranching businesses as well. So we want to get to know you as well. Please share in the chat box if you haven't already done so. We want to know where you're watching from. We've been having more and more people from out of state, which is so cool. So we want to know where you're watching from, how many people are watching with you, and what's your favorite bird today. So I'll give you some time to do that. And like Tyler said, if you have any questions, just go ahead and type those in the chat box and we'll get to them as soon as we can. So in this webinar, we're going to explore how you can help to conserve birds by creating a backyard or a neighborhood park, maybe a community garden oasis. We're going to learn how to do that, right? The best practices for attracting birds to your yard. And we're going to discover how this not only benefits you and birds and other wildlife, but also you. So if you're on this webinar, you're probably already convinced that birds are pretty cool and a very, very important part of our ecosystem. But just in case you need a little more convincing, you might be wondering why birds? Why is Bird Conservancy a whole entire organization dedicated to just conserving birds? Why are there so many other conservation organizations just like us that are focusing on birds? So they are inspirational for ages. They have been providing inspiration for artwork and engineering and poetry and music and all of these things. They're an inspirational creature. They are accessible, so no matter where you are, even if you are in the concrete jungle of New York City, you could look around and find some birds. So that's an easy way for people to connect with nature no matter where they are. Birds also provide ecosystem services. So if we had a world without birds, there would be a lot more pests, right? A lot more rodents, a lot more mosquitoes, things like that. They also help with seed dispersal and pollination, so they are critical to our environment. And then there are also what we call environmental indicators. You might be familiar with the term the canary in the coal mine. So birds tend to be pretty sensitive creatures. And so they're often one of the first groups to be affected by environmental changes. And that can be a signal for us to go into a place and start trying to figure out why the birds are disappearing. And if we can figure that out and work to fix it, hopefully the birds will come back and we won't lose any more creatures in that habitat. How many birds are there? There are so many birds. So species, worldwide, there are about 10,000 species of birds, which is just incredible. Just in North America, we can find around 1,000. In Colorado, 507 species. And just at Barr Lake, throughout the year, we can find 350 different species of birds, which is absolutely incredible. And if you've been in on any of our webinars or following us on Facebook and things like that, you've probably heard of this 3 billion birds lost study. So our avian conservation biologist, Arvind Panjabi, he was a co-author, or is a co-author, on this groundbreaking study, and we're so proud of him and so glad to be part of this work. And what the study found was that since 1970, we've lost just about 3 billion birds, which is pretty devastating. But a really important part of the paper was not only to provide this data, kind of sound the alarm even more than it already is, but also to instill hope. So not only did the study find that, yes, we've lost a lot of birds, but it also found that conservation works. So there were a few bird groups where we've actually seen increases. So in things like raptors and waterfowl, we've actually had population increases. And that's largely due to these really concentrated conservation efforts. So there is hope. There are things we can do. And it's not just up to professional biologists and scientists. It's up to everyone to help conserve these birds. So I hope that's why you're all here today, to see what you can do to play your part in bird conservation. So again, out of this study, we came up with these 7 simple actions that just ordinary people can do to help birds. And we're going to actually go through most of these today, focusing on habitats and what you can do in your own backyard. So if you think back to your elementary science lessons and what a habitat is and what we need in a healthy habitat, a habitat, of course, is where something lives. And everything, including us, need 4 things, 4 main things: food, water, shelter, and space. So if you're looking out in your backyard, or maybe you have a community garden or a neighborhood park where you might be able to make some changes, try to look at that from a bird's eye view and think about if you can provide food, water, shelter, and space. And the more that you can provide all of those things, the more diversity and the greater number of birds and other wildlife you're going to be able to help out. So let's start with space. And what I really want you all to know is that don't underestimate your space. Even if you're living in a city, maybe you're in an apartment, you just have a little balcony, that's okay. Don't think that you can't help. You can still play a part. It's important to remember that your space is just a smaller area of a bird's overall range, right? So a bird isn't just going to be living in your yard. Your yard is going to provide a space for that bird to find food or shelter and things like that. So even if you do just have a balcony, that's okay. There are still things that you can do. And of course, if you have a great big yard like the one on the bottom, there are a lot of things you can do, which can be really fun. So space is important. Providing shelter. So birds can utilize lots and lots of different kinds of shelter. And again, the more diversity you have in your space, the more diversity of birds you're going to get, which is really exciting. So one of the most important things, and one of our simple actions, is to plant native plants. And what that is, a native plant is something that simply has evolved in the ecosystem where you live. So a native plant, as opposed to an ornamental plant or an invasive plant that might have been introduced from somewhere else. And there's a couple of reasons that native plants are really important. So they, in a nutshell, they better support the overall natural ecosystem. Now, what that means for you and the critters in your yard is that they're going to be easier to grow. They're going to require less water, which is especially important, right, for states out here in the West. And they're going to provide a really wide variety of food for birds as well, not just in the nectar or berries or fruits that they produce, but also insects make up a huge part of many, many birds' diet. And if we have native plants, then we'll have native insects that the native birds that we have more evolved to eat. So those native plants are really important. Now, you might be at a loss. You have no idea what native plants are in your area, how to grow them, where to get them. No worries. So I like to say we are the bird people, not the plant people. So I'm not going to give you recommendations of specific plants. And that's because it just really matters on where you are and what kind of space you're working with and your goals for your overall space. But there are some really amazing resources. And we will send out these links at the end of the webinar as well with the slides. So the first one, if you are not in Colorado, even if you are, Audubon has a wonderful resource. You can go to audubon.org/native plants. You can type in your zip code and it will give you this whole list of plants that will work for you. It can be grasses, shrubs, bushes, flowers, perennials, annuals, and then you can sort by what kinds of birds you want to attract, if you have more shade or more sun. So it really can cater to what you need. And so it will provide you with a list of the best plants for your area. And then it will also provide you with a list of nurseries where you could go to find those plants, which is great. If you are in Colorado, and I would venture a guess that most states have a resource like this, but Colorado Native Plant Society, so CONPS.org, is a tremendous resource for us here in Colorado. So just like Audubon, they provide ideas of what kinds of plants are going to grow best where you are, but they break it down to be even more specific. So if you are out in Brighton or more towards the plains, there's a specific set of plants for that. If you're in the foothills below 7,000 feet, they have suggestions for that. If you're in the mountains, that's going to be more specific because all of these are different ecotones and are going to be able to support different kinds of plant life. So not only do they have suggestions for which plants will grow in your area, they also have design. So they have landscaped and examples of landscapes of how you can put these different plants together to have different levels and different colors and things at different types of year. It's incredible. So I highly recommend checking out Audubon and Colorado Native Plant Society to become a native plant professional. Next, besides having native plants where birds can take shelter, find food, having brush piles and downed logs, if you have a dead tree in your yard, as long as it doesn't pose a safety hazard, go ahead and leave it there. That provides incredible shelter for birds. So these brush piles and log piles, many birds are ground feeders. So they'll, robins, northern flickers, these kinds of birds are hopping around on the ground foraging for food. So if they sense danger, they're going to want something really quick to fly to. So brush piles and down logs provide that sort of quick shelter for those birds. And not only that, especially downed logs provide really great habitat for insects and spiders and other tasty things that birds would like to eat. So, and I know sometimes our homeowners associations, we have to be careful and play by those rules. So make sure you're not breaking any rules, but do know that even though it might look messy, it's a great thing for birds and other wildlife. The last thing I want to talk about for shelter are bird houses and nest boxes. So, contrary to what some people might think, birds don't utilize nest boxes and bird houses year round. So, when they're not nesting, usually they're going to simply roost or maybe sit in a tree near the trunk during the night when they're resting. But during nesting season, bird houses and nest boxes are critical for these cavity nesters. So in the picture here, look like we have a tree swallow, other things like chickadees or American kestrels or house wrens or bluebirds. They rely on cavities for nesting. So again, if you have a dead tree in your yard or a snag, that's a good place for cavity nesters. But if you want to hang up a birdhouse or a nest box, that can be really, really helpful as well. I do want to make sure though that you do some research before you hang one up, because there are some birds that require specific dimensions. So for example, if you get a commercial birdhouse that's maybe a little bit more decorative, the entrance hole might be fairly big. And if that happens, a lot of times what can happen is you'll have starlings or house sparrows that will take over instead. Those are non-native species, so not ideal. We really want to have our native species in there. But if you research specific dimensions for nest boxes, you'll increase your chances of actually getting house wrens or actually getting bluebirds in your nest boxes. Do be sure though too, if you are going to put up a birdhouse or a nest box, they do require a bit of maintenance, not a whole lot, but just make sure before spring, before nesting season begins, you go ahead and you clean out that old nesting material and make it nice and clean for the next birds that come. So those are a few examples of shelter for birds. Water is really, really crucial, and birds need water year round. So they use it for drinking, of course, but also for feather maintenance, just like this adorable little bluebird sitting in this bird bath. So you can have a bird bath in your yard, you could have a water feature, you could have misters, these kinds of things. And even during the winter, maybe even especially during the winter, it's really important to provide water for birds. And so there you can get heated bird baths, which are pretty cool. But if that's not an option for you, you can of course just refill your bird baths every day, break up the ice. Of course, don't fill it with too hot of water, warm water, just neutral water so that we're not shocking the birds. But just make sure that that's refilled every day. You want to place your bird bath near cover, not too close, so that's a lurking cat or other kind of predator might be able to jump on the bird easily, but close enough to cover that they feel safe. And so that they can kind of flit away quickly if they need to. And of course, we want to make sure that we're refilling our feeder, or excuse me, our bird baths and cleaning them regularly as well. All right, and food. So this is probably what we're all most familiar with, is putting out a nice bird feeder. There are lots and lots of great options for food. One thing to remember though is that it is a supplement. So birds are really, really resourceful. They're great at finding their own food sources. But if we can put food out for them, that's great too, right? Just like some days you might be really, really tired, and the last thing you want to do is come home and cook dinner, and it's much easier to order some delivery. That's kind of what we're doing for the birds here, right? Giving them a nice delivery of easy food. And one thing that people wonder about often is it okay to leave my bird feeder up year round? You might have heard that leaving your feeder up year round keeps birds from migrating, or they become dependent on your feeders. And I want to put your minds at ease so that those things just aren't true. Birds have a really just intense instinct for migrating, and that is controlled by their circadian rhythm. So the temperature, the length of daylight, these kinds of things are what drive birds to migrate. So you leaving your bird feeder out is not going to prevent them from doing that. So you can rest easy there. So if you do are going on a vacation or going away, you don't need to worry about keeping your bird feeders filled. Those birds will find other food sources, but it is always fun and a good thing to do if we can supplement their food. So I'm curious to know how many of you all already are feeding the birds. So go ahead and type in the chat box if you're already feeding birds and if you've seen any birds so far this year. Okay. So just like nest boxes and bird houses can be specific to different birds, depending on what kinds of birds you want to attract to your yard, you can use foods to do that. So the easiest way is through native plants, like we talked about earlier, that are producing different berries and fruits or hosting different kinds of insects. But of course, seeds and grains are probably the thing that we're most familiar with. So if you're a beginner or you just want to do something really easy, the best kind of all-around general purpose seed is this black oil sunflower seed. So most birds will eat it. It's a really, really nutritional source of food for birds. So if you have feeders and all you put is black oil sunflower seed, that is A-okay. In the middle here, we have a blend. So in a blend, you're going to have that black oil sunflower seed, maybe some peanuts or corn or millet, all this different mixture that might really attract a wide variety of birds. So that's why blends are nice. I do want to say you can get something called a no mess blend. They are going to be a little bit more expensive, but I think that they're really worth it. And this is why. You can see in the picture here, there's some sunflower seeds, but they still have the holes on them. Birds aren't going to eat the holes. They're going to crack it open, eat the seed in, and then discard the hole on the ground. So these no mess blends, they contain only sunflower seeds and other seeds that are already hulled, and then they don't have the filler seed that some other bird seeds can have. So things like oats or milo aren't actually really attractive to a lot of birds. So a lot of times, and you might have seen this, birds will sit on your feeder and they'll just pick out seed and throw it on the ground until they find that delicious sunflower seed or piece of cracked corn that they were looking for. So buying these no mess blends just helps to keep the ground around your feeder a lot cleaner. And that is going to help you by not attracting mice and things like that. Another great kind of seed to have is this one on the end called Niger. And what that is a thistle seed. So they're really, really tiny. And these are going to be more specific to things like goldfinches or pine siskins or juncos. So that's how you can get a little bit more specific birds like that. So those are just a few examples of seeds and grains we can have up year round. Of course, there are many, many, many different types of feeders as well. So we have our tube feeder that is maybe the most familiar up top here. On the bottom left is what's called a hopper. And the bottom right is a platform. So again, all kinds of different birds have different feeding preferences. And just a note about placement as well. When you are figuring out where you want to place your bird feeders, if there is a window, if your house is nearby, you want to make sure that you put the bird feeder within 3 feet of your house or a window, or at least 10 feet or more away. And that has to do with window strikes and helping birds to not hit our windows. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later. All right, so suet is a really great one to put out in the fall and the winter. So suet is basically a cake made of birdseed, and it's held together by suet, or an animal fat. So that's going to provide a lot of energy that birds are going to need in the fall and winter. So you'll see birds like chickadees or woodpeckers come in, and you can put them in a suet cage. You can get really cute shapes like a snowman or something like that, so you can get fun shapes and things like that, but that's a really, really great supplement to have in the winter. You can have them out all year round. It's not really necessary, and especially in the summer when it gets hot, they tend to go rancid. So I recommend fall and winter. This time of year, though, is when we want to be putting out our nectar feeders and making some sugar water. So depending on where you are, unfortunately, if you're kind of on the plains of Colorado, you just don't get a lot of hummingbirds. That doesn't mean you can't try, but it is certainly easier the closer you are to the foothills and the mountains. So just a couple things to note about putting out sugar water. There is a certain ratio. So we don't want to get too sugary for those hummingbirds. So a 1:4 sugar to water. If you want to make your own, just boil that until the sugar is dissolved, cool it down, and pour it in your hummingbird feeder to hang out. You can store it in the refrigerator. One thing that you might have seen is people putting red food coloring in their nectar. And it is true that hummingbirds are attracted to the color red, but we don't want to put that in their feed, in their nectar, because that artificial coloring can be very harmful. So if you're making your own, or even if you're buying it at the store, really be sure to avoid the ones that have coloring in it. As you can see in this picture, this feeder has red on it, and that is more than enough to attract those hummingbirds. Since it is sugar water, it can tend to go moldy and bad pretty quickly. So make sure you're checking those feeders pretty often, and change that sugar water out and clean it really well at least once a week, and definitely more often during the warmer seasons. I'm wondering, actually, what I'm wondering is what kind of bird feeder is most popular with you all that are listening? How many of you have hummingbird feeders versus seed feeders and things like that? Some other fun things we can do is put out orange halves or some jelly or peanuts. We have a beautiful Bullock's Oriole sitting on an orange. They love fruit and jelly, this little one down at the bottom. So putting out those can be really fun. They'll actually eat from nectar feeders as well. So even if you don't have hummingbirds, you might be able to get an Oriole or two with your nectar feeder. Peanuts as well. It's so fun to watch things like blue jays pick up a peanut and shell it open. Just make sure that they're not salted, no oil. Birds don't need that kind of thing. So if you are going to have bird feeders, just like having bird houses or nest boxes, they do require a little bit of maintenance. It's nothing crazy. We just want to make sure that they're clean. Just like we don't want to eat food that's been sitting, for a long time, neither do birds. And just like humans, especially, we're realizing now when we congregate, diseases tend to spread. So the cleaner that your feeders are, the healthier we're going to keep birds. So what you're going to want to do, no matter what kind of feeder it is, whether it's a tube feeder or a hopper or a nectar feeder, we are going to want to use a bleach water solution, a really, really weak one, about 1 part bleach to 10 parts water. So clean those out, and you want to get, like, if you can get a bottle brush or something like that, so you can get in all the nooks and crannies. Scrub that, let it sit for about 10 minutes after you scrub it, and then rinse it, and then rinse it again. We don't want any remnants of bleach on there because birds are pretty sensitive. Let it air dry, and then hang it back up, fill it up, hang it back up. I recommend doing that if you can at least once a month. Again, when it's really hot, if it's been raining a lot, or if you live in a really humid area, you might want to do it a little more often. And this will just make sure our birds are healthy and not eating rotten food. One more thing I do want to mention too about food is that if you live in an area such as us here in Colorado, or if you're more towards the mountains, we have some other wildlife that might like to eat from our feeders. And you might be thinking squirrels, which, yes, we'll talk about that later, but actually bears, especially if you have nectar feeders out or fruit and things like that, those will attract bears. So yes, we want to put out food and stuff for our bird friends, but if you are in a bear area, please just be mindful of that. If you do see a bear nearby, make sure you take those feeders in so that bird doesn't learn that your yard is a place where it can depend on to find food. We definitely want to keep ourselves and our bear friends safe, because birds will be able to find that food elsewhere. And again, using native plants will help. They won't be as attracted to that as a tasty nectar feeder. Ah, yes, here are our squirrels. So I have done this presentation before, and I didn't have this slide in, and that was all the questions I got at the end. So I wanted to be sure to address it. The ongoing battle with squirrels and bird feeders, it is a funny one. So there are a few things that you can do to try to deter squirrels, but if you have ever had a bird feeder, you know that they are very, very tricky. They are very inventive, they are tenacious, and they're just very funny to watch. They can be frustrating. So a couple things you can do. This picture on the bottom left is what's called a baffle. So that can be hung on the pole of a bird feeder. And so you can see the squirrel climbing up has a really hard time getting around it. Not to say that they can't get around it, but it makes it a little more challenging. And then on the bottom right is a feeder cage. So that helps so the squirrel hopefully can't reach into the feeder. If you do a Google search, there are certainly a lot more inventive ways. I've seen one that actually will like spin a squirrel off of the feeder, which is kind of entertaining. So there are things you can do. Also spreading like Vaseline or something slick on the poles can help. Just make sure, I wouldn't use WD-40 or anything like that, because that is going to have a color, and then you might have little squirrel prints all around your yard. But something clear like Vaseline would be okay. But just know that it is kind of an ongoing battle, and just to kind of have fun with it. Another thing you can do is actually provide squirrel feeders, so maybe a cob of corn or something like that, but put it in an area that's further away from your bird feeders so they aren't as tempted to break into those feeders. Okay, so we have food, water, shelter, and space, and that is going to provide an amazing oasis for birds, pollinators, lots of other wildlife. But also don't forget about yourself, especially during these times when it's, we maybe can't go to local parks. We only have our backyard or a window to look out of. Don't underestimate the power of a really peaceful spot for yourself. So even in the best of times, sitting outside and taking a deep breath can do absolute wonders for our physical and mental health. And there are numerous scientific studies that have shown how beneficial this is. So I challenge you today, even if you don't have this crazy backyard oasis for birds yet, and you're still kind of in the planning stages, just go outside or look out your window and take some deep breaths. We like to do something called a sit spot, which is where you pick a spot. Maybe it's under a certain tree, and you go there. Maybe you go there every day or once a week or once a month. And it's kind of just your special spot. And you're able to really notice what's going on around you and using all of your senses to see how things are changing in sight, in sound, in smell. Just a really, really good way to relax. You can also take it a step further by nature journaling. So if you're in your sit spot, it's so fun to have a journal, pencil and paper, and just write down your thoughts, draw pictures, write poetry, kind of whatever comes to mind, can be really, really therapeutic. And then of course, if you can, and it's safe to do so, just taking a walk, and keeping your cell phone in your pocket and on silence, so you can really just take in what's around you. Okay, so coming back to our 7 simple actions for birds. We've covered a lot so far. So let's see. We have learned how to have less lawn and plant natives. That's another thing, is if you plant natives and plant lots of them, you have less grass to mow, and who doesn't want that? That's an extra bonus. We talked about how planting natives helps us to avoid pesticides and herbicides so we can cut down on our chemical use. While you're sitting out in your yard and enjoying your bird oasis, you can be drinking some bird-friendly coffee. And what that means is, so coffee that is shade grown and is organic, that's going to be really beneficial for birds because most coffee plantations are grown in tropical habitats where is a critical wintering ground for many, many birds. But those plantations are clear cut, and the only thing growing there are coffee plants. So that doesn't support bird diversity very well at all. So if we're drinking bird-friendly coffee that's shade grown, that canopy is intact. It's just a much better habitat for birds in those wintering areas. And then you can be drinking that bird-friendly coffee out of your reusable mug so that we're using less plastic. And of course, we've been hearing that for a long time. We've known that for a long time, that cutting down on our plastic use is really beneficial for just our whole entire environment. So there are a few things left that we can do to check off all of our things on our list about our 7 simple actions. So just a few more things to go through is making our windows safe. So you might have had this experience that you were sitting at your kitchen table enjoying your morning coffee or tea, but then you heard this really dull thud on your window and you run over to see what happened and you see this poor bird just splayed out on the ground. And sometimes we get lucky and they just hop up and shake it off and they fly away. But unfortunately, many times they're not so lucky and they don't make it. So window strikes are actually a pretty big cause of fatalities in birds every year. And the reason for that is if you take a look at this picture on this office building, we see a reflection. Now we know it's a reflection, but birds, even though they have pretty good eyesight, their eyes are located on the sides of their head. And that means most birds don't have very good depth perception. So as they're flying along, whether it's a big office building or maybe you have a big bay window at your house, what they see is this reflection and they think it's just trees and sky and they can keep on flying through, which is unfortunately not the case. But there are some really easy ways that we can help break up that reflection so that birds know to avoid it. So there is special window tape that you can buy. I think from American Bird Conservancy, they sell some, or you can use a masking tape or painter's tape. And what you want to do is actually make a pretty small grid pattern. You could do just vertical or just horizontal. The best would be a grid pattern. And you want to make sure that those lines are pretty close together, 2 to 4 inches apart, in order to adequately break up that reflection. You can also use decals. So maybe you have kiddos or grandkids that like to put those holiday decals on the windows. Those can help a lot. Again, you're going to need quite a few on there to make sure that the birds notice it. And if you have some window paint like that chalk paint lying around, you could do some patterns and designs on your windows, or just simply drawing your blinds, putting a screen over your windows, things like that. Anything that's going to break up that reflection is really going to help birds avoid windows and keep from running into them. The next one is cats. And before you cringe and click out of the webinar, because I know that this is a hot button issue for some people, I am a cat owner, so I totally get where you're coming from. They're great. They're great pets to have, but they are a significant killer of birds. Unfortunately, they kill billions of birds each year. And you might think, oh, no. My little Mr. Fluffykins would never hurt a fly. But if you think about it, cats, no matter who they are, at the end of the day, they are predators. And when they get outside, those instincts take over. So truly the best thing that we can do for both birds, but also cats for their health and safety too, is to keep them inside. But if that's something that you're not able to do, maybe you have a cat that is already used to being outside, and that would be, they would be very upset if you then all of a sudden tried to keep them indoors all the time. There's a few other alternatives. So on the bottom picture here, we have a very fancy catio, which I love. When I'm able to buy a house and have a yard, I am going to build a catio for my cats. Looks so fun. This one is quite elaborate. So that gives them a nice safe space where they can be outside, enjoy themselves. They can still listen and watch the birds, but they can't get to them. If a catio isn't in your budget or your ability, your engineering ability level, there are some other things you can do too. So there is these bibs that you can buy for cats that help make it harder for them to stalk prey. And then there are also these collars, and they look like clown collars. So they're big and they're brightly colored so that they're more visible, so the birds can see cats easier and get away a little bit quicker. So if you have cats, or you have a neighbor that has cats, or family that has cats, these are some really good tips for them to know about. All right, and the last one on our list was becoming a community or a citizen scientist. This is one of my favorite things to do because a lot of times we might not think of ourselves as scientists. Maybe you are a teacher or a plumber or a chef or something like that, and you might not think you're a scientist, but the truth of the matter is all of us can help with science. And that 3 billion birds lost study that I mentioned at the very beginning, in order to come to that conclusion, those researchers needed so many data points. They need all of that information, and it's simply impossible. There aren't enough scientists, and those scientists don't have enough capacity to collect that much data. But that's where we come in. So if you are sitting in your on your porch or in your kitchen or something, or in your backyard, if you're walking around a neighborhood park, you can actually help contribute to science. So there are a couple of different ways you can do that. One of our favorite ones is called eBird. And so that is an app that you can have on your phone, and it's really, really user-friendly. So say you are going on a walk, you're going around your park, all you would do is say start birding, and then you can just keep a list of all the birds you're seeing. And then at the end of your walk, you'll submit that list, and that data becomes available to researchers. You can also do feeder watch. That's a little bit more time specific. So that would be during the winter, and you're just watching and reporting the birds at your feeders. So those are two really, really easy, accessible citizen or community science projects. But if you're thinking, okay, but I don't know the difference between a blue jay and a bluebird, how am I supposed to know which birds to put on my list? Well, this Merlin app, or if you go to allaboutbirds.org, are excellent, excellent tools for beginner birders. I even still use them when I'm not sure about a bird ID. All of these are through Cornell Ornithology, so they have phenomenal resources. I highly, highly recommend going on their website and checking out all of their articles and tips and tricks. All right, so back to our list. Now we can check off making windows safe by using window tape or paint or something to break up the reflection, keeping our cats indoors or putting a collar or something on them so they can't hunt as easily, and watching birds and sharing what we see by being a community or a citizen scientist. Okay. Whew, that was a lot. Thank you all for hanging in there. I want to open it up to questions now. So we'll stay on for a few more minutes. Before that, I just want to give a heartfelt thank you from myself and all of us at Bird Conservancy, especially on the education team. We miss getting to do in-person programs more than anything. It hurts our hearts so much, but you all tuning into these webinars is really helping, and we've received so many kind words and donations, and that really, really just means the world to us. So thank you. And if you are able to, and if you want to see more programs like this, you can go to our website, birdconservancy.org, and give a donation. Again, if you have the means, we just really, really appreciate it. So thank you all. And again, we'll stay on for a few more minutes to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a great presentation. I do want to also bring up our webinar for next week. We are going to keep doing these every Thursday at the same time. Next week, our webinar, we're going to dive deeper into bird identification. So it's going to be Birding 201. We're going to talk more about eBird, how to find birds, because finding them is step one, and then identifying some trickier passerine species. If this is your first webinar that you've tuned in with us, I will be sending out a recording of this webinar and all of those resources that we talked about. I will also be sending out our YouTube channel. So our YouTube channel is a great way to review all of our past webinars that we've done. So if you're looking on getting better at your birding, especially during the springtime, we do have our Birding 101 and some other great ones to review before our Birding 201 next week. So we'll open it up to questions. So please type your question into the chat window, and Sarah and myself and Kelsey will help you answer any of those questions that we might have missed.
We have some questions about what to do with neighborhood cats who might be outside roaming around and how to deal with that.
Absolutely. It's a tricky one. It's very, very tricky because, like I mentioned, some people are very protective of their cats and their right to be outside. And like I said, I completely understand. But going to, if you know who the cat belongs to, going to that neighbor and just, in a very, of course, cordial way, maybe bringing some cookies with you probably wouldn't hurt either. Just kind of telling them why you're concerned and that it is a really big deal, why birds are important and why we need to help protect them. And then giving them these options. So building a catio or wearing these collars, things like that. And of course, not everyone is going to be receptive, and that's okay, but you did your best by trying. So it is a really, really hard thing, but you can do it. I have faith.
Just to second off that, we have a lot of free range cats in my neighborhood. And when I moved in, that was something that was really frustrating to me. And our neighbors, they're all feral cats. Our neighbors have been doing a good job of trying to catch them and then giving them to an animal control because these are feral cats and they do have a huge, huge impact on killing birds. So it is frustrating, but now that you all are educated, we hope that you can help educate some of your neighbors as well.
We also had a question about how long we should keep a bird feeder up. If we're not seeing birds at that feeder, how long should we leave it up to keep trying?
That's a great question. So a lot of times the first birds to visit your feeder will be chickadees. So they're really, really curious, really kind of brave, bold birds. But it does take birds at least a few days to find your feeder. So don't give up hope. I would leave it up as long as you can, and as long as it's not attracting rodents or squirrels or things that you don't want, as long as you don't mind having it up. Because it can take birds a few days. With hummingbirds, it can take them a lot longer. So I've talked to a few people who have put hummingbird feeders out and had hummingbird plants out for years, 2 or 3 years, and then they finally got a hummingbird to their yard. So it does take a little bit of tenacity, but yeah, stick with it and you'll get some birds eventually.
Yeah, Kelsey, I'm seeing the question about wasps. How do we keep wasps out of nest boxes and away from houses in general? Sarah, do you want to chime in on that?
That is a really, really good question. And it's hard. Again, that's the thing with trying to attract one animal to your yard is that a lot of times you attract more. So I would say if you know that a certain nest box or a place tends to attract wasps, keep your eye on it. And as soon as you see wasps going in, and you feel comfortable doing so, go in at night or when it's cooler, and you can keep scraping the wasp nest off of the inside. If you're not comfortable with doing that, because that sounds a little bit scary to me too, just try taking that nest box down for a season or so and then hang it up somewhere else the next season. Hopefully that will deter the wasps. Good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And wasps, they are part of our ecosystem, so we don't want people going out there using any kind of pesticide or killing wasps. They are part of us. I know it's hard because we don't want to get stung by them, but they are part of our ecosystem. So just trying to keep them at bay the best you can, I'm sure is helpful. So those were great suggestions, Sarah.
See. There's so many questions. This is amazing. Trying to go through them all. Looks like a lot of them were answered.
Awesome. Well, if you do have, here we go, some hummingbird advice. So Shannon, I think you said you lived in Lakewood. We do get the broadtail hummingbirds that migrate through. I'm sure you could see some in your neighborhood or near, I think you said Bear Creek. They don't stick around all summer. They'll probably be migrating mostly through. And like Sarah said, I think just waiting. And one day, hopefully you'll get one.
It takes a lot of patience. Yeah. Putting out those nectar feeders and then doing some research on plants that specifically hummingbirds are really attracted to would be helpful. And yeah, just keeping at it. And yeah, the broadtail is definitely the most common one that we'll get out here. I know especially if you're closer to the foothills and even in the mountains, rufous and black-chinned hummingbirds can be more common, but yeah, they're tricky for sure.
Here's a good question about native plants and any recommendations of annuals and vegetable gardens that birds will enjoy. You can try your best, Sarah. Again, we are the bird people. We do focus a lot of our time about birds, but I'm sure you have something to add about vegetable gardens.
Let's see. Well, the tricky part is if you are planting a vegetable garden, you probably want those vegetables for yourself. And maybe don't want the birds to eat them. So that can be a balance. But yeah, I would, again, really recommend going on that Colorado Native Plant Society or Audubon for some plant recommendations. Just about anything, like tomatoes and anything like that might attract some insects as well is going to be helpful. I saw one, and I'm glad this person said it because I forgot. I do want to say, so a lot of you might be familiar with our bird banding operations that happen at Chatfield in the spring and at Bar Lake in the fall. So of course, for our spring season, our banding station is not going to be open to the public, unfortunately, but we are going to try to do some virtual programming. The details aren't worked out quite yet, but keep your eye on our Facebook page and our website for updates on that. Hopefully in the next week or so, we'll be able to get those up and running.
All right. Looks like things are starting to wind down in the questions. I just want to say thank you so much, Sarah, for presenting on this topic. It's a perfect time for it. And I've been in my garden every morning and watching birds in my backyard. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone that attended. Again, if you love these webinars and you want to see more of them, your donations really help us out. We are a nonprofit. It definitely brings great joy to our lives to see the comments, and your feedback is also greatly appreciated. We're going to keep doing these every week for the foreseeable future, so please tune in next week for Birding 201. We'll be presenting that one again, so it'll be fun to get back to our webinars. I'll be sending out the link and the thank you to this recording either by the end of today or definitely by tomorrow. So if you have any questions, you can always email me back after you get that. So thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day.